take the long way home. And I've seen the mothers mourn the loss of their only born. But still I believe we are given nothing more than we can bear. Our vision is only blurred when life seems unfair. So who am I to judge?
I feel honored to be here. And I want to speak more than just about what happened to my wife and I, because what happened to my wife and I is emblematic of what happened to Alan and what happened to the Central Park Five and what has happened to so many others of people of color in this city and in the state and this country. First of all, I was contacted by a very close friend, Alumbe Brath, from the Patrice Lumumba Coalition. Alumbe is in a nursing home now. I had just gotten back from a capital murder trial of formerly H. Rap Brown, Jamil Alameen in Atlanta, Georgia, that lasted for a couple of months. And that trial took a lot out of me because he was my personal friend and comrade for many years, going back to 1967. And although we were able, by the grace of Allah, to spare his life, or have his life spared, he was convicted. And he is serving a life sentence now in a federal prison in Florence, Colorado. So when I came back here, I was emotionally depleted. And this struggle that I've been in for most of my life, you have to, although it drains you, you have to get back into the race, because the reasons for the race never end, and so therefore the race never ends. So I got this call from Alambe in June saying, Tariff, there is a man by the name of Matthias Reyes, in an article in the New York Times, who made an admission that he was the one who raped and assaulted the jogger in Central Park. And would you please become involved? And at that time, I didn't know whether I was going to become involved or not, but out of necessity, it's important for those who do this type of work, and it's a lonesome path, but it's an important path to take. You automatically become involved because it's warfare, you know, and you are trying to correct an injustice that was committed by an adversarial system that created an environment of warfare in the first place. So essentially, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because I think it's important for Yusuf to tell his story, and which is the story of everybody else that constitutes the Central Park Five. Essentially, what I did was involve myself with one of my associates, colleagues, Roger Warren, and my wife, Evelyn Warren, who's an attorney. And there were a couple of other people who represented a couple of other of the Central Park Five. One was a man by the name of Myron Beldock, who is Yusuf's attorney, and then at that time, Eric Seif, who represented Corey Wise. Roger, myself, and my wife represented Santana, Raymond Santana, Kevin Richardson, and Antron McCray, and we still represent them in the civil action. But when you engage yourself in these type of activities legally, what you have to do is to file what is called a motion to set aside the verdict. But in order to file a motion to set aside the verdict, in order for it to be ruled on favorably, you have to have something that serves as a basis for it being vacated. And so my wife and I went up to Dannemora, to Clinton, where Matthias Reyes was, and spent 2 days with him, and got the whole story, most of the whole story, and got an affidavit from him, which we put into the motion to set aside the verdict. And we filed the motion. Myron Beldock filed his motion on behalf of Yusuf. Eric Seif filed his motion on behalf of Corey Wise. And at that point, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office had already started a reinvestigation. But that didn't mean anything to us because we had to file the motion to keep them straight. And although the persons who were leading that reinvestigation was somebody I had known from years before in other cases, the Michael Stewart case back in 1983, a woman by the name of Nancy Ryan, who headed the criminal division, and Peter Casolaro. At that time, the tables had changed and they had gotten religion, and they decided to conduct an honest reinvestigation. And that's what they did. And so they came out near the end of 2002, in December of 2002, and just around this time, actually about a week or so after this, in 2002, they came back with a response to our motions. And in that response, and this is critical, it's a 58-page response, and they agreed not only with everything that we said in the motion and agreed that the conviction should be set aside, but they talked about a couple of important things. They talked about, one, about how there were false confessions. Now, you know, since I've been involved in this case, I have become somewhat of an expert on false confessions, how they occurred, why they occurred. I'm not going to go through that because that would take a couple of hours, at least 2 or 3 hours, to explain the process. But they were false confessions, and one of the things that they pointed out is that one of the reasons they were false confessions is that there was a different description by each one of them, by Yusef, by Corey, by Raymond, by Antron, and by Kevin, as to how it occurred, where it occurred, this so-called rape, when it occurred, etc. And there was a crime scene evidence which totally contradicted the police version that a number of these boys went down the path of grass into this ravine and raped and sodomized and beat this young woman, because the path was only about 18 inches wide, which means that there's only one person that could have done it, and that was Matias Reyes. So we were able to be successful in the criminal case, getting the conviction set aside. One of the other features that I think is extremely crucial is and Alan talked about the DNA. The DNA issue was especially crucial because there was no evidentiary link to Yusef or any of the other 4 young boys at that time, young brothers. There was no DNA link, there was no evidentiary link whatsoever. And at that time, they had 2 different tests, DNA tests that they could use. One is called the RFLP, and that's called the Restriction Fragment Length Polymorphism Test. And that's when you have an adequate amount of DNA sample to test to determine whether, in fact, the sample that you're testing with another sample is a match. But when there's a small amount of DNA, there was another test that they had at that time, and that was called the PCR, or the polymerase chain reaction test. And that test was designed to test small amounts of DNA that could not be tested through the RFLP process to bring about realizable results. So they had 2 tests. And one of the things that they learned after a certain period of time, because the FBI did the testing, is that when the test results came back, there was no DNA match to any of these young boys. And what is also crucial is this. On the 17th of April, this incident occurred on the 19th of April of 1989. On the 17th of April of 1989, 2 days earlier, there was an incident that was quite similar, almost the same, in which Matias Reyes, the actual perpetrator of the crime, attacked another young lady, raped her, and she scratched him. And she scratched him in an area on his face that caused him to have stitches and go to the hospital. They knew who he was. They knew his name. They knew he had been scratched. There's a detective by the name of Irma Rosario Irma Duffy Rosario, or Irma Rosario Duffy, who actually was a detective assigned to that case. And the pattern of that particular crime was exactly the same as the pattern of the crime that occurred to the Central Park jogger on the 19th of April. They disregarded that. And the reason they disregarded that is the same reason that they disregarded the innocence of the Scottsboro brothers back in 1933 in Alabama. And that's because of the color of their skin, and that's because of the incessant media attention that was given to the case, and the fact that they had already been convicted in the press and convicted by other people, many people in our own community as a result of the press coverage of the case. So there are a number of factors that resulted in what happened to them, which is unfortunate tragedy. And I think that it's important to note that they never will ever admit that they are wrong. And as now Alan pointed out, they never ever come to the realization of admitting that they are wrong. They always attempt to create some excuse that attempts to legitimize the wrongdoing. And that's why this case has lingered on in the Central Park 5 for over 10 years, actually 11 years. And I think it's important that the case is ultimately, at this point, is going to come to what we hope to be a favorable resolution. And all of these young men have steadfastly, just as Alan did, have steadfastly maintained their innocence from the very beginning to the very end. Whether that occupied territory be in Palestine, whether it be in South Africa during the apartheid era, whether it be in any area, geographical area, where the legal system, where the military apparatus that supports that legal system and works in concert with that legal system is there to protect the interests of those other than the folks who live in those occupied territories. And that is why they act with impunity in the courts whenever an injustice occurs, and that's why the police act with impunity, and that's why they do disgraceful things to people who live in our communities, because they are deemed to be, by them, occupied territories. And that's how they look at us. And that's why these things happen to us. And so that's why lawyers like myself, challenge and challenge and challenge, because we and get locked up too, because we are at war. And I'll speak very briefly about what happened to my wife and I, and then I'll give it to you, Seth. My wife is also on the team of attorneys seeking monetary relief for these brothers. But we were on our way actually to a legal meeting for the Central Park 5 at the offices of Bell, Dr. Levine and Hoffman in Manhattan, our colleagues, when we saw the police chasing a young brother at the McDonald's restaurant at the corner of Vanderbilt and Atlantic. And there were a pack of officers that were chasing him, just like a pack of hyenas. And they brought him down, and when they brought him down, he was a young brother, slight built brother. They brought him down hard and face down. And he was face down, one of the first things they did was put his hands behind his back, and they handcuffed him. And after they handcuffed him, they went through his pockets and they didn't find anything. And you heard one of them say, I think I see a gun. And the reason they do that is to legitimize everything that they do to them. And of course, that pack of officers, that pack of hyenas, just like in the Discovery Channel, when you see what happens in the African plains, they beat him and they devoured him like he was a piece of prey. And of course, the traffic was stopped. People were looking. There were little children, little black children that were in the McDonald's restaurant looking out the window. I'll never forget that. And with horror on their faces. And I'm talking about some of these officers the same color as us. but they beat him like a dog. And their team leader was this arrogant racist sergeant by the name of Talby, who took the first kick to this young man's head. And after he took the first kick to this young man's head, instead went back about 15 feet with his right hand on his hip, where his 9mm weapon was. I can't begin to describe how they beat this young man. And so we got out of our car, our vehicle, and the vehicles were stopped, traffic was stopped, and said, please, you can't do this, you stop this. If he did something wrong, take him to jail. He said, get the F back in your vehicle, this is police business, and leave us alone. At that time, they had jerseys that did not have identification on them, badge numbers, shield numbers. So we decided to take down the license plate numbers. He saw us, came over to the vehicle, and he approached us and said, I told you to stay out of this. And we said, we're lawyers. We ain't staying out of nothing. We're taking down information and we're gonna report you. And he came over to my side and hit me 5 times with his fist on the left side of my head as hard as he could. He burst both lips. And then my wife asked, well, why are you hitting my husband? And he took his fist and hit her in the jaw. And of course, my father always taught us that when you're at war, you always remember that you have to fight in such a way that you can come back to fight again another day. Because had I raised my fist, or had I had my weapon, I'm licensed to carry a weapon, he would have shot me and killed me right on the spot and said that I threatened him. So he hit me. But what tore him up was that every time he hit me, I stood strong and didn't even let him know that it hurt me. And he pulled me out of the vehicle and hit me again. And then my wife and I were arrested, sum and substance. We were taken to the precinct. We saw a Muslim sister that we had known for many years who came over to the vehicle that we were in. We gave her a name, Roger Wareham, one of my comrades and my colleagues, and a number for her to call them, and Alambe Braff, who had a radio show at that time on WBAI when he was physically able, and Sally O'Brien put it out over the air. That's one of the things about a community, because a village functions together. And I'm talking about not just Africans, not just people of color, but people that knew our work in the community, whites, Latinos, Muslims. Everybody showed up at that 77th precinct, and they demanded our release. Councilman Barron, Charles Barron, and of course, we were released. I was released right around midnight, and my wife was released about 10:30. They had planned to run us through the system and charge us with felonies, and you know how they do. But that prevented them from doing it. And ultimately, we appeared in court for over a year, and we settled the case on the eve of trial for an amount that we felt that we could live with based on the circumstances. So, but it's important as I end, again, that what happened to us is no different, because we as lawyers, we call it a mens rea. It's no different from that diabolical mens rea or state of mind that these occupied troops have when they prosecute a brother like Alan, when they know he should not be prosecuted, and when they prosecute a brother like Yusef and the other 4 brothers when they know they should not be prosecuted. They have disrespect for our community, they have disrespect for our people, our way of life, which is why stop and frisk has been a tradition within our community, but we must always stand up and fight like men and fight like women. And we thank you for your support.